Hello, everybody. Welcome to DevTales. This is a new podcast from Handsome Phantom. I'm Dustin. Alongside me, the most glorious ginger, Brandon Duncan.
That is me.
Brandon, we've got some exciting stuff going on for this show.
We do. We are super, super pumped for this. This is fantastic.
This is an idea we've had for a couple months now. And if you listen to the little preview section, you can probably skip past this, but the show is called DevTales. And Brandon, tell me a little bit about it.
It's about devs and their tales in the simplest form.
Wow,
but,
nice.
Yeah. The name is in the title, but it's about the people behind the game, because sometimes you can get lost in the game, and sometimes it doesn't even seem like people could make this because you're so good. I don't even know what I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying. Like sometimes when you're just sitting there and you're looking at the screen, sometimes you forget that there was a person behind a computer or a desk with a pencil and pen and drawing and making making all these
exactly
things.
And that's what this is about. This is about bringing those stories, bringing the struggles and the good things, and just the stories behind what all that involves and what it takes to make something like this.
Yeah. So this week, very special episode because this guy here was one of the inspirations for the show.
Yeah, he heavily influenced and inspired us, really, to do something like this and look at things in a new way, for me personally. So
Benjamin Rivers is the first guest. He has made a game called Home. I'm trying to remember the exact year on that. I'm a bad host. I didn't do my research. Okay. 2012. 2012, he released Home on the PC. Shortly after, released on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation Vita. And he's working on a new game, too.
Yeah, it's called Alone with You. It is a sci-fi
romance
adventure.
And it looks freaking awesome.
It looks amazing. And, this episode, we're going to talk to him about a lot of things, one being that.
Yeah, so enough of us bullcrapping. Let's get into the interview. So, Ben, how are you doing today, overall?
Pretty good. We just had a big team meeting yesterday, so that was sort of a fun milestone to hit.
Okay, nice. And so you're from Toronto, Canada, correct?
That's right.
Awesome. So have you always been from that area?
No, I actually grew up in a series of small towns in sort of more rural parts of Canada, in northern Manitoba, and then in rural Ontario. And I moved to Toronto when I was 17 to go to college.
Okay, neat.
Wow, fantastic. Okay, so something that's very important to me as a person here in Pennsylvania is we know a lot about someone that's from Toronto, and his name is Drake. How do you feel about Drake?
I'm probably the worst Toronto spokesperson ever because I'm the guy who doesn't watch hockey or baseball or listen to Drake or kind of do any of the things that, sort of get exported and mentioned when people mention the city. So he seems cool. Never met him. I'm sure we'd be cool to hang out.
We're kind of in the same position because we're from Pittsburgh area, which our exports are like sports and
mostly sports, which we're not really into at all. So yeah, definitely relatable. So I was looking over, I was creeping on your Wikipedia page and your website. I guess it's public. So it's not really creeping.
Right.
I was trying to put together a list of the different things you do, and I found that is a very staggering list of things. So let me make sure this is right. You write graphic novels. And you illustrate those too, right?
That's right.
Okay. So you do programming and you also teach at a college or university?
University now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So is there anything that you don't do? I mean, that's just doing one of those things alone is impressive enough.
I don't do anything with numbers in it. If it's math related, you might as well just throw me out the door.
See, I always thought that if you did like programming for a game, there's always math and stuff involved with that.
Me too. Yeah. Thankfully, I've managed to mostly avoid all the really hard stuff. I mean, there's some things in the new game where I wrote code actually use math. And when I did it, I said, I can't believe I actually figured that out. Because I mean, I remember playing D&D back in college, and like barely being able to figure out how much, how many hit points I was supposed to remove because I just was so bad at math.
Yeah. I felt the same way when I did some HTML in college, so I figured that game developing would be just as pressing as far as numbers went, but it doesn't sound like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's different. I mean, we live in a time where it's never been easier to make games, which is something I always say to people. And it's really just about how you take those tools that we now have access to and kind of harness, what you have and make something great with it, which has never been possible before in quite the same degree. So I'm very lucky that the sort of middleware community and the people who make game development tools cut up for people like me who weren't, like actual real hardcore coders from the days of yore.
Yeah, for sure. So let's go way back. So do you think growing up that you were more gamer or like comic book, just because you kind of, that seems to be like the two main focuses that you work in right now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would say games were always sort of the main feature. I've always loved comics since I was a kid. I have an older brother. He's actually quite a lot older than me, or two older brothers, I should say, and both of them are huge comic nerds, sort of in different degrees. So I grew up from a very early age with heavy metal comic books, that kind of thing. But also games. I was playing in television games with my mom when I was 5, and everything was all about sort of those sort of like great nerd mediums of the time. But games are the ones that always stuck with me, and I don't even know why. I think it's because I lived in a bit of a remote town. I was always sort of like a kid with lots of imagination, kind of kid who liked to draw and stuff. So obviously comic books I liked because of that. But then once you could see something that sort of moved and had this weird world to it, that had this life to it that you could really get lost in, I think like so many other kids who grew up in like the early 80s and whatnot, that was kind of what really got me hooked. So I love comics so much, but man, do I love games.
Yeah,
It's just, it's dangerous.
Yeah, I remember you talking on Twitter about an N64. Was that a big console for you then?
No, it's funny. Yeah, I've been doing some sort of research and also just kind of discovering or rediscovering that era a little bit. I go on these little crazy jaunts where I sort of just get an idea about something, like a specific console or an era, and I kind of just want to find out from people what it was like to be them at that time, and maybe there's something I could learn from that. I was in college when the N64 came out and the PlayStation came out. Like I just left to go to college a year after the PlayStation came out, I think. So I had a PlayStation and I had an N64. I don't even know how I got that, but I was sort of transitioning from being a Nintendo gamer at the time to just discovering like Silent Hill and discovering all this other stuff that was coming out, or sort of other weirder PlayStation games, and really getting into the PlayStation side of things. But I just always had a love for Nintendo related stuff. But at that point, that's sort of when I started that, like many other players these days, that sort of weird, tumultuous relationship with Nintendo where I loved certain things and I didn't like other things, or I was growing out or up or sort of in a slightly different direction than some of what their products were doing at the time. So it was always the first time I really started to take notice of like different markets for things, realizing, hey, why am I more interested in like these bizarro like one-off games that are coming out of Japan that I can get on PlayStation, but like why am I less excited about like Ocarina of Time than I feel I should be? I mean, I love Ocarina of Time now, but it was something I kind of had to rediscover because I was really obsessed with, I don't know, whatever it was on PlayStation, like Final Fantasy or something.
Yeah, so as we had mentioned before, artist, game developer, video game sociologist, it sounds like. Did you say you were doing some sort of research? You should just add that to your Twitter bio, video game sociologist. I think there's an untapped market there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I have Evernote files on everyone. They just don't know it yet.
That is fantastic.
So, growing up, and this is kind of a basic question, but what were those games that were really special to you that you think kind of shaped you not only to the gamer but the creator that you are today?
Sure. Well, I mean, like so many kids of the era, it was NES games. I had a friend who lived down the street, and he was the only person I knew who had a Master System. or it was actually his dad's, and he was very strict about using it. So when we go over to play, it was like entering this weird new world with this completely other set of video games that I'd never really heard of. And I found that so neat because I had no idea that there were, other companies, other systems, sort of other ecosystems floating around. But I remember when we got our NES for Christmas, the first game we got with it was the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, because that was sort of when all that was at its
That's
height.
the one that has like the top down part and then you go down in and it's a side scroller.
That's right. It's
I had that one too. And it was really, really hard.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. I think it took me, if I remember, 2 to 2.5 years to beat that game.
Wow.
I finally did. I'd done it once, never again. I mean, I'd love to do it again just to sort of see if I could still do it. But I remember just how insane and difficult and just sort of convoluted and weird and obtuse that game was. But that's, everything was sort of like that then. So the main thing was NES stuff, and I was a huge Mario fan. But I have this hilarious memory of playing Mario 1 so much that I was just so sick of playing a Mario game because Mario 2 hadn't come out yet. And I just didn't know what to do. Like, I just remember thinking like, oh God, we have to find another game to play. I'm going to lose my mind. But of course, back in the early 80s, everything was about rental stores. So we would always be going to a, local place, getting like 1 or 2 games and some popcorn or treats or whatever it was. And then hopefully getting the weekend to spend playing something new. And that's how I played Zelda 1 with the map. Was the first time it was through a rental place. I never actually played it again after that, except at a friend's. Metroid, a bunch of all those other ones were all through rentals. And just discovering like River City Ransom, like playing Final Fantasy and just going like, what is this? I don't even know what's going on here. And a whole slew of those early NES titles. So that was kind of what defined everything. But it was a combination of sort of playing games like Mario by myself and kind of just getting lost in that. But going back, it was actually a bunch of early Intellivision games that really sort of triggered my creativity. And unfortunately, I do not have this or even a photo of this anymore, but I used to make little game manuals for games I was making up in my head. So I must have been, I don't know, 5 or 6 or something. I started doing my first comics, I think, when I was 4 or 5 years old, like just sketching like Ghostbusters comics or just dumb things like that. And then I remember making these Intellivision titles, and if I remember this map in my head, which is probably not accurate at this point, but it was a River City Ransom style, like city brawler. So I would draw the little Intellivision sprites, I would do the level designs and figure out whatever the stupid story was and kind of go through that. And I would sort of pack them up into little stapled booklets, and I would make a bunch of these. And I guess those were kind of like all I knew, but I started to pay attention to television games and realized, wait a minute, a lot of them use all the same kind of sprites, and they use a lot of the same techniques. Like the characters are animated the same way. They use the same sort of generic people character. And I started to get really interested in kind of understanding that I think these games might be by the same people, or at least sort of in the same, range of creativity. Not that I really knew what that meant at the time. So understanding that was kind of neat. And then I would see something like my mom would play like Astro Smash, and she would beat it 6 times in a row. I just kind of like drop the mic and walk away. And I would just sort of get this understanding of games as a challenge, but also as this other kind of construct. And it just opened my mind to all this kind of stuff. But it was, to go on a complete tangent, it was the 2 Dungeons and Dragons games for Intellivision. Especially the first one, which were Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Second one was Treasure of Tarman. And those 2 were huge because they were the first adventure games that I ever played. And AD&D for Intellivision. Have you guys ever played it?
I haven't. I've prided myself. I've tried to play almost every console. I've never come across an Intellivision, but I know what you're talking about.
It's absolutely amazing for its time. It's randomly generated. You have a simple concept of you have to get. You're trying to get to like the Misty Mountain. You're trying to put together the Crown of Kings again. Or rejoin its 2 halves and then get to the Misty Mountain, all that kind of thing. But you delve into these sort of cave systems underneath mountains to get what you need. And sometimes there are things like a gate that lets you pass through a forest. There's a river, which you need a boat for. So there's these items that you can get that then allow you to pass those particular obstacles. But every time you load up the game, it randomly generates the overworld. And then you just pick a mountain. It'd be like blue would be kind of easy, gray would be normal, red would be difficult, and you would just sort of delve it. But it has its own system where it draws the map around you as you delve. I'm assuming it actually generates it at the same time. So you can't see where you're going until you go. So it's actually, to me, the very first horror game I ever played, because you actually hear sound effects. You'll hear bats from off screen from the next room. You'll hear other monsters, but the most terrifying thing, and one of the reasons why I made Home, was that there was the red dragons in the game would have the most terrifying sound, and it basically sounds like the television version of a cat purring. So it was supposed to be like a rumbling growl of a dragon, but it kind of sounds like a cat purring. It's actually kind of adorable when you listen to it now. But as a kid, that was the most terrifying thing in the world, because you're on this green screen with these sort of pale yellow octagonal rooms with little arms that branch off to other rooms, and you'll get down to a room, maybe you'll kill a bat, you'll find a bit of treasure, get another arrow, and you think you're okay, and then you just start sort of nudging left towards one passage, and as the passage starts kind of drawing itself, you'll start to hear the sound effect, and all of a sudden you just think, oh man, I don't know what to do now. So it's the first game that ever made me feel the same thing that something like Silent Hill did, where I thought, I don't want to do this. I'm totally terrified. I'm really freaked out. And you start making all these weird decisions in your head, and they were just so it was so tense and very psychological and very affecting, because you'd be thinking about it all the time. And that was probably the very first game that ever made me think that a game could be more than just a series of challenges that you had to complete, because it was random, so you could play it as many times as you wanted. But the fear never went away, and you never knew when it was coming. So every time you were back in the same spot.
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing you talking about different sound design in early games, because when we were playing through Home again the other night, I was like, the sound design for this game is very cool, and the sound is it's such a huge contribution to what the mood you were trying to go for, I think. And so it's really interesting to hear that side of it.
Yeah, honestly, I felt the exact same way when you were talking about it. I was thinking of specific points in the game, like when you first that cluster of bats comes flying at you, or when you go and you could see someone in the wall and you hear some sort of weird whispering, or they say something, and when you're describing that, like I could see the inspiration and where it's been pulled from, and it's just really neat. So
yeah, all that was that game has never left me AD&D in terms of just what it managed to do with so little. And there's never, there's a lot of roguelikes now and sort of dungeon crawling games, but there's never been a game quite like that, which is just sort of this really basic and not overly long kind of adventure where the whole point is to just kind of feel your way through and use your wits, but not where you're expected to manage like a ton of inventory and do a lot of math and just, manage a bunch of quest menus and things like that. It's really just very pure, and it's the kind of game I think I would love to tackle at some point, because you don't see it as much anymore. And I find I've never, like that was my pre-Resident Evil sort of moment as well, of realizing that a game can just kind of get its claws in you and just really start messing with you. And I just love it.
Yeah, now something that I thought that was super interesting is when you were describing as a child, you would like staple together like little game things that you were creating. Now, was there ever a time that you didn't want to do something like that, or create or anything like that in your life, or was that? It sounded like you had a pretty good direction going pretty early.
Yeah, I was just that kid. I was just such a kid who wanted to make stuff all the time. Like I would make all my own toys. Again, this is like back in like the 80s, so like Ghostbusters and things like that were super popular. So I would make my own Ghostbusters toys because they didn't have a lot of the toys out yet, or they weren't available or whatnot. So I would make proton packs by getting jumbo-sized cereal boxes, covering them in paper, drawing out what a proton pack should look like, affixing markers to other things and string, and sort of like making little like with the hooks. I'd spend hours making a toy, and then I wouldn't even want to play with it. I'd be kind of done. So I was always sort of interested in just building these silly things. And I had a brother again at the time who was older than me, so we weren't always sort of doing the same things, but he would sort of poke and prod me and kind of make me do stuff like this. He would sort of encourage this sort of idea of just being this lunatic who just wanted to make stuff out of garbage all the time. So I would, when I would read comic books or things that were your magazines related to cartoons I was watching, whenever they had contests for sending in, drawings of Slimer, stupid things like that. Like I would enter them just because I was so excited at the idea of making something and having it go somewhere. So for some reason, I was just always into that right from the get-go.
That's fantastic.
So you mentioned your brother and a little bit of your mom. I'm curious. So growing up and figuring out what you wanted to do, was this something that was your family like real supportive of this when you were like, hey, I want to make stuff with my life?
It was really interesting. So back in the mid 90s, I was finishing up high school, and this is when I was living in rural Ontario, a small town, a village, like a literal village, really, really small place. And I was kind of at the point where I just, like classic teenager stuff. I just wanted to get the hell out. I just wanted to do anything other than be in a small town with people who I felt like were all the same. And, I wanted to find new stuff, and I was so desperate to just get new experiences and all that kind of stuff you want to do when you're 16 or 17. So to me, I was looking for college. So in Ontario, or Canada specifically, in some provinces, we had grade 13. This doesn't exist anymore. But back at the time, we did in certain provinces. And the whole point is that grade 13 was almost like pre-prepped for university, not college, but university. So it would kind of get you one step closer. But I was so desperate to get out. I was like, I don't care. I don't want to go to university. Like, I'm going to go to college, just get the hell out and do something and get started on, whatever post-secondary life was. So I said, I'm not going to worry about grade 13. I'm done at grade 12. And I got a job working in a kitchen just to sort of bide my time. And then I was applying to places. So I applied like an animation place, got brutally rejected from animation college. I think I have a scan of it somewhere. It's the most cruel rejection letter I've ever seen. And it kind of spurred me to be like, all right, if that's the way this is going to be, like I'm going to accept that challenge. I'm going to do better than you think I can. And so I just ended up picking graphic design. That's what I ended up taking because it seemed like it was applicable. I didn't even know what that was at the time. And more importantly, it got me out of town the following January, which is what I wanted to do. So I moved to the city by myself. Like my dad helped me and all that stuff, and it got me set up. And I moved here to Toronto and went to college, and then kind of just tried to figure out what it was like to be an adult living, like in a weird city. And then through that was just meeting other people and kind of realizing like I just love making stuff. I like creativity, obviously, and it was kind of just a process of kind of finding where to apply some of those things and trying to learn to be better at any of it.
Yeah, obviously you're a creator. I mean, as a kid making those Ghostbusters packs sounds pretty sweet. Now, like, how did you go from, doing the novels and stuff with the graphic design to deciding that, hey, I want to make this in motion? Or like, I mean, obviously you had a love for video games. Was it just like, hey, I could do the same thing, but make it more or like different? Yeah, interactive.
Yeah. Well, in the 90s, I was actually making Doom levels. That was my first start of doing anything game related. I used to make Doom levels and Duke Nukem levels, and I'd print off, and Wolfenstein stuff too, actually, at the time. Print off tutorials and whatever they had off the archaic internet at the time, and sort of deal with things like that. Once Quake came around, the tools started to get like a little complex for me. It was kind of like daunting. I didn't understand how to like punch holes in a polygon to make a room to do 3D levels in Quake. I was kind of more interested in like the 2D style of Doom at the time. So I kind of put some of that stuff by the wayside. But then what happened was I never kind of left that idea. I made more sketches. I made more concepts. But because I went off I thought I was going to be like, the world's greatest graphic designer, do all that kind of stuff. I focused on that in sort of work. But what happened was, 7 or 8 years ago, here in the city, sort of explosion of indie game development and community began. And developers who were already here, such as Metadata and Cappy and a bunch of other companies, started finding each other, started organizing events, started bringing people out. And there were a few seminal moments that got a bunch of us out and meeting each other and sort of risking the idea of making a small game. And tools were becoming available where you could use Scratch or you could use even Flash plugins and things like that to kind of just sketch stuff out. So a lot of it was just realizing that some of these tools that cut up and would allow people like me, who was just absolutely not, I do HTML, CSS, I was doing that kind of stuff, but I had no idea about how to make a game from a technical point of view. But I had all these, concept sketches, design ideas, and sort of all this sort of self-study that I'd been doing up until that point. So it was kind of just a weird perfect storm of just thankfully being, at the right place at the right time, and then just being dumb enough to try and running with it from there.
So it's interesting you tell me that there's a dev scene going on in Toronto. I know I hear about Montreal all the time as the big spot for games, but I didn't really know that Toronto kind of had a community like that. So what are there any other developers that we might know about from Toronto?
Sure. Do you like Guacamelee?
Oh yeah, they're making Drinkbox, right? Severed.
Yeah,
okay, yeah, we saw that at PSX as well.
Yeah, they're from here.
Okay.
Cappy, of course, who helped make Sorcery with a friend of mine, as well as are making Below right now. They made Super Time Force, and Critter Crunch, and all that.
Yeah, great
They're from
game.
Toronto. There's a whole bunch of mobile studios who actually do really well. The people who made Mega Run and Mega Jump, which was like a major mobile hit at the time, they're here in Toronto. There's probably, honestly, within like a certain radius, there's probably like 20 companies you could find.
Man.
And we have Ubisoft Toronto now, which came in 6 years ago, or just over 6 years ago. And as well has been sort of feeding into the talent pool and sort of joining the community as well. So we actually have a ton of developers from here, and as well as like single people, like Matt Ricks, who made Trains for iOS and is now working with a partner on Future Grind, which was also at PSX. Milk Bag Games, so they're from here. And just like sometimes I actually see stuff and don't even realize something was made by some guy who's like in the suburbs around here, or just like a couple of neighborhoods over that I didn't notice. And there's a ton of development in the city.
Interesting. And so you said there's kind of like a community aspect where do you like bounce ideas off each other, or just get together or something like that?
Yeah, well, like I said, 7 or 8 years ago, whatever it was, what was formed was the Hand to Eye Society, as it's called, and it's still going today. So it was sort of a loose organization to kind of realize that, hey, wait, there's other developers. Like another one, MetaNet, who made M++ recently for PlayStation and Steam, or PlayStation just right now, but also made M+ and whatnot. They're from here as well. So a bunch of these people, Jonathan Mack, who made Everyday Shooter and Sound Shapes, kind of got together, and then a bunch of us, or a bunch of them at the time, made an excuse to just kind of hang out maybe once a month. So we would go, like, they would book space at a bar or at a thing, and then we would do talks. Like Sorcery was shown for the first time at a presentation there. There were other things like They Bleed Pixels, which is made by Spooky Squid Games, that was shown there, sort of in prototype form a long time ago, stuff like that. And then people would just kind of drink beers and meet people and whatnot. And that's formalized more over the years as there are, much more events. We have a huge comic book community too. There's like there's a good chance that if you read a DC or Marvel comic book, there's somebody from Toronto writing or drawing it. So there's a big comic book community too. There's sort of lots of events related to that here as well. And then now we also have the IGDA. So we had a chapter before that was kind of like a little bit dead. And then once Ubisoft formed here, some people who work there, including Leslie Fortoy, who's a producer there, senior producer there, became president of the local chapter and kind of revitalized it. And we have regular meetings, and there's professional talks, and sometimes we fly people in, sometimes it's local, and there's just tons of stuff that happens through that has been like a professional level, like learning sort of job skills kind of stuff. And that's been super great. So what started as really just a bunch of people kind of wanting to have an excuse to like hang out, drink beers, and meet other like-minded people has turned into a much more formal community. That's also offshoot from that. We have other communities, including Bento Miso and a bunch of other places that host regular events and jams, and they have workspaces and just a huge sort of secondary layer of organizations that support people who are developing games as well. So it's actually like in 7 or 8 years, it's pretty nuts. How it was kind of very unofficial, very loose, and now you can say there's an industry and a community, and people you can go to, and all that's here.
Man, that's totally. I honestly I had heard that Drinkbox was from there, but I didn't connect it at all. And man, Sound Shapes, that's a game that I haven't like actually had bad game rage since I was a little kid. And that game made me scream at my TV when I was trying to platinum that. So it's cool. It's really neat that, talent, kind of grows together like that. All right. So let's go ahead. Let's move into, I have a couple questions about Home before we get into Alone with You. So kind of where did Home start, I guess?
So there were a few small little things that kind of came together at a certain point. One of them was I guess a draft or like a one-page intro to a story I wrote a long time ago on some ancient PC I had. And I found one day and realized, I was like, oh, this is neat. This would be a good setup for something. And it was about this man who was locked in a room and didn't know why he was there. And then that was sort of like one seed of it. But the other part was just a series of wanting to make a game and really push a little bit of what I want to do. And originally I thought, oh man, I'm going to make this game called Home. It's going to be cool. I'm going to do it in like a weekend. It'll be like a fun excuse to get better at Game Maker and just maybe learn to program for real. And then I was working full time at the time, and I was sort of plugging away on that stuff. And eventually I left my job because I wanted to go freelance. So I was doing that and sort of just putting time into it. And then it just kind of also became this much larger thing where I realized I think I want to do this for real, like make an actual game. So it was, I really love horror games. Obviously, I talk about that stuff all the time, and I wanted to take a shot at it. And then I was kind of just talking about some things with my wife, and we were just going over things that I liked, didn't like. And it just kind of became what it is almost by some weird, like just, ball rolling down a hill series of events of just realizing, wait, I can do this now? Well, if I know how to do that, then that means I can make a system that does this. And if I know how to do this, that means I know how to animate these doors, or I know how to process this text, or do whatnot, do that kind of stuff. But I have a design doc for it that is literally 1 page long, and it says, it's a narrative-driven retro horror game. And I kind of didn't figure out a lot of what was going on at the time, but the whole point was, I want to see if I can make a horror game that uses very low tech to see if it's still possible to creep people out, or to make them, think too much about things, or get freaky about stuff, without having to have, like $1 million or $30 million budget. And that came from being a designer where you get design briefs on projects and you have mandates from clients. And I kind of found it very comfortable to work within a little box and say, okay, this is the job. This is the little game I'm going to make. Let's see what I can do in this, very specific set of parameters.
Yeah, it is interesting talking about, making a game scary. And now when I was thinking about it, I'm like, there isn't, I haven't played through all the specific endings, but I don't know if there's anything actually like in your face scary that happens in Home. But when we played it all together, we were like on edge the whole time. And it was interesting, like, how much mood and atmosphere, and like you said, keeping you on edge, and the not showing certain things can kind of, lead your brain weird places.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, part of good design, they say, in terms of graphic design or any other sort of type, is about reduction. It's not about, addition. And I guess there was a lot of trend at the time too for seeing games that were getting bigger with more bullet points and whatnot. And especially being someone who could only kind of make, a game that was so big, or that was only so sophisticated, I thought it's really actually cool to sort of see what you can do with less. Like, maybe this is just going to be a terrible idea. It's never even going to work. I mean, the original version for the visuals were extremely low tech. And then my wife kind of looked at them and said, yeah, you can't make a game that looks like that. Like, no one's going to give a shit about that. So I sort of bumped them up again. And this actually halfway through the development, the joke is that halfway through development, the game went from being an 8-bit game to a 16-bit game, where the resolution got like doubled and things got added, and then I expanded the color palette by a certain degree, and I decided to throw out some constraints and focus on kind of making it what it is. But that all kind of happened at sort of a weird, like the worst time possible during the process. But it was all based on realizing, well, I definitely know I can get there with this new, art style. But the original one, I think I went a little bit too far. Like, it's too minimal. It's not gonna fly.
Yeah, I was gonna say, speaking of minimalism, what was it like making a game alone, or with incredibly limited help?
Yeah, because I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure when we were talking at PlayStation Experience, you said you made Home pretty much by yourself, right?
Yeah, I mean, so what happened was, obviously, like, I designed it, I did all the art, I programmed it. I had some great help by people, like, just local in the community, who we would just ping each other for programming questions, and especially because I was so new at so many things. And I mean, the version of Home that you played today, or recently, if it was on PS4 or even Steam, is already sort of like several code upgrades from the original release that I sort of released on my own, because I kind of learned how to do things better, and I had to accommodate a bunch of new things. But I even got help from people at Game Maker, which was fantastic, and kind of got some advice. It's kind of like from like the old patron who says like, "That's cool, like that's really adorable. You're trying to make a game, like I'm going to show you how an adult does it. Like here's some actual code," and you see it and go, "Oh crap, this is for real. I got to learn what this means and how this works and go from there." So a lot of it was like that. So I quote made it myself end quote, but with a ton of community support and as well as just help and advice and lots of amazing feedback and whatnot from lots of people. I mean, there's one man to whom I will only ever refer to as Dirty Uncle Phil. I'm not even going to explain that. I just wanted to hear that and lament the fact that I said that again. But he was sort of the person who really helped me sort a lot of story related things and figure out a bunch of story system things that I was having a hard time with, literally up till like 4 days before launch of the original PC version. And without him, I wouldn't have been able to make Home, because he helped me bounce off ideas. He sort of threw monkey wrenches and some concepts I had and really made me think long and hard about what was going on. So there was a whole lot of that going on. So, there were days when you're just trying to sit there and plunk away at it, and you think, like, what am I doing? Like, am I the only human in the universe who's ever even going to give a crap about all this stupid stuff that I'm writing right now? And then there were days when other people would see it and sort of offer advice or opinions or changes and whatnot. And that made you think that, well, if they're even interested enough to sort of get down to brass tacks with me, then maybe that's a good sign. Maybe this isn't just a, like a bad one-off idea that will go nowhere.
Yeah, so you were talking about it on PC. Now, I personally played it on PS4, and I had a quick question: why why PlayStation over Xbox?
So what happened was PlayStation was actually coming to Toronto and talking to people a few years ago, and it was Nick Sutner, who is on the PS Blogcast, as well as Shane Bettenhausen, who kind of came and were sort of like just talking to developers and seeing what was going on, because there were local developers, specifically people like Jonathan Mack, who had already had a relationship with PlayStation. And we had so many events going on at the time from sort of spring to fall. They were sort of checking out the scene and seeing what's going on. And they were sort of interested in Home. They said like, "Oh, we played on Steam, or we like it. It'd be great if there was a way to bring it to PlayStation." And I kind of said like, "Yeah, that'd be really great. I have no idea how to do that." But what happened was they got talking with the people who make Game Maker Studio, and I kind of was trying to nudge people and say, "Hey, have you like had a meeting with these guys? Like, I really want to do this." And so those things sort of organically formed behind the scenes without my interaction, and things just kind of happened where they said like, the Game Maker guy said like, "Hey, you can make a game for PlayStation now." I said, "Really?" Because I'm going to do it. Like, that's the best thing ever. So a lot of it, again, was just sort of right time, right place, where the technologies caught up and sort of deals were made and things happened where I could approach them and say, "Hey, if you're still interested, like I would love to make a PlayStation version of this." Because I just like, console gaming is my bread and butter. That's my heart. That's where my heart has always been. And the idea that I could make a console game is just flat out insane, and I have to do it.
I was gonna say, that's fantastic, because Dustin and I, the PS4 is really close to our hearts, so we're very glad that it's on PS4.
Yeah, I actually, the first time I checked out Home was on PC. I believe it was on a Humble Bundle, right?
Yeah, it's not been in one of like the mega, like the super crazy bundles, but it's been in the Humble store, and it was Adventure Game Bundle or a couple things like that.
It was a while back. I think it was closer to release.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, it's interesting. I'm always curious about how games end up on certain platforms over others and things like that. So I got a real quick question is that, so were you, was that something when they were like, "Hey, we want to release Home on PlayStation," was that something, did you work directly on the PlayStation version, or was it kind of like, "Okay, well, send us some of your code and we're going to translate some things over and help you out here"?
Every version of Home is mine.
Okay.
Like I've got, builds, sometimes branches for specific things, but it's for better for worse, it's all off my desk. So there were, they have port houses for things like that. There are obviously companies that help certain other companies get things, but I think it was kind of just able to get running. What happened was when the guys at Game Maker were showing off PlayStation support at GDC a few years ago, they're like, they want to show Home. It was one of like their, I guess they're sort of, I hate to use the word because it sounds so douchey, but it was like a premier game they wanted to show. To be like, "Hey, there's a game you may have heard of," and we've got it running on PlayStation. So they showed it to me and they said, yeah, we kind of got this up and running in like 25 minutes. And I said, okay, that's good. And obviously it took me way longer to sort of do a port of it, but knowing that it wasn't just like starting from scratch was a huge deal. And part of me, it's a little bit more difficult now because I have a few more fish to fry, which can be a bit troubling, but it was actually just really exciting to be like, you mean I get to make this game myself for PlayStation? Like, it's actually not going to be that bad? Like, that's not even possible. That's, my 11-year-old self would have never even imagined that you could make, I could be like, hey, let's make a Nintendo game. No problem. It'll take 6 months. Not a big deal. So from the experience of doing Home on the original PC release, which is just off a website, to then Steam, to then iOS, to then PS4 and Vita, that was a series of pretty interesting challenges and just kind of like learning to deal with product workflow and company stuff and trying to pretend like you know what you're doing in terms of programming and all that kind of stuff.
So my next question was going to be, how was the initial reception? But it seems like we've already kind of answered that, being that, the game was released on PC and suddenly there's all these opportunities like, hey, let's release it on iPhone and PlayStation 4. So did you have a pretty good reception right off the bat for the game?
Yeah, so it was interesting because what happened was I had submitted the game to IGF that would have been fall of 2011, I guess. And I was actually at a comic book event this one day, like selling my comic books at this local event. It was like a really small thing, super fun. I love to do it. And then I checked my phone at the end, and there was a notice that the IGF trailer I'd put out, which, was on the IGF website, I guess, had gotten picked up by Joystick. And all of a sudden there was like just a ton of traffic about this. I was like, what? Like, Joystick picked this up? What's going on? And for whatever reason, they, a couple places picked it up as sort of something they found interesting out of the entrance that year. So it got passed around, and that was 8 months or so before the game first came out. So what happened was, at some point I made the probably inadvisable decision to do a collector's edition of the game because I just desperately wanted to. And that got sent out and got a whole bunch of press in terms of like setting up pre-orders and things like that. And it got really got run through all the websites, which is really great. So when it launched on PC, it was like, it did okay. It was super fun. We had to fulfill 200 boxes of this collector's edition by hand, which is pretty, doesn't sound like a lot, but it was at the time. And I was like, cool, like I made a game that's super cool. And then what happened was there was a contact with the people at Valve because of a thing they were doing locally. And I submitted my game, and then it got approved. And then I was like, okay, I guess I'm making a Steam release. So it was kind of like just fixing some things. I added some levels, like I added some extra stuff for the game. I fixed some bugs. I did whatever I could, and I was super excited. And then the day it went on Steam, it just totally blew up. And I mean, just to put it in perspective, it was what I made on the original release of the game over, say, 3 months. I made on Steam in 20 minutes or 3 hours.
Wow, that's awesome.
Wow,
so it just was like
fantastic.
a crazy thing where I said, you gotta be kidding me. I mean, like if you're like DICE, it's not a huge amount of money, but if you're a single developer at the time, it was a great boon. And it kind of just did really well off that first release. And then that was also a time when, certain kinds of indie games were getting a bit more exposure. And, again, it was kind of a sweet spot for a lot of stuff. So again, I was very lucky. But that was, like you say, a huge jumping off point for a lot of other opportunities. So I was just over the moon. So I told all my clients I was working with a little bit later that I would be transitioning away from client work by the end of the year to focus on games 100%. And then as of like December 31st of 2012, I no longer worked on client work, and I incorporated earlier that year, and I officially became like a 100% indie developer.
That's awesome.
At that time. So I was kind of like, I don't know if this is a good idea, but it's too late. I'm going to do it.
So yeah, I bet you that moment when you realize you're like, man, I can do this for real was just probably awesome.
Just so freeing. Like
it was amazing. It's terrifying because suddenly you think, cool, I can make video games for a living, and then you think, can you really?
Yeah.
But at that point, you're just totally drunk on the moment of just saying like, cool, I made a video game and some people are playing it. Like, I don't care. I got to do this for the rest of my life. So
yeah, I was gonna say. So what's a normal day in the life of Ben Rivers?
I am a very OCD disciplined kind of guy. So I get up at 7:30 every day. I eat breakfast, get dressed. I go for a walk. I come home. I'm at my desk. I take a lunch break of like 20 to 30 minutes. Certain days I go for runs or work out at night or in the afternoon, and I work till 5. And I usually stop at 5, and then my wife and I have dinner, and then we try to go for walks or go, have date nights or go do things like that. So it's pretty relegated that way. But I'm the kind of person who does not deal well with chaos. If things get a little too out of hand, I have a hard time dealing with it because I like to kind of have my ducks in a row. So I try to, ever since I went freelance for the first time, I said I need to structure my days or else I'm just going to go absolutely crazy.
So it sounds like your wife has been pretty awesome and pretty supportive throughout this whole process.
She's literally the best human being on the planet.
That's fantastic because you're married to her.
Yeah, that's good. Like, I win 1-0.
Yeah. All right. So I don't want to hold you too long, so I want to leave us a little time here left to talk about Alone with You, the new game.
Mm-hmm.
I'm super excited about this game from the moment I saw it from a distance at PlayStation Experience. I'm like, those colors, that's what I need.
That's what we need.
It's more purple. It's the new purple adventure. We have a bunch of funny internal nicknames for it, but my favorite is Purple Spaceman Adventure because it's just like lots of purple and pink and blue all bleeding into each other.
So my question right off the bat, on the website, it says PlayStation 4, PlayStation Vita. Is this console exclusive right now?
Right now it is, yeah, console exclusive. So it is a Sony Pub Fun game. They got behind the game when I pitched it to them, and they were really interested in kind of just bringing it. So they get it, for a certain period of time for sure. And yeah, I'm kind of honestly like fulfilling dream number 2 of just saying like I'm officially making a console game like right from scratch, like just writing a console game, not porting it, not doing anything, but making a game for PlayStation, which is nuts.
So I think I said this when we talked to PlayStation Experience. I was like, thank you for believing in the Vita, and I'm curious what I don't know. Did you have an option where you're like, okay, I could do this just on PlayStation 4, or I could do this on both, and how easy is it to do it on both, or how difficult? I'm really curious about that decision behind that.
Sure. Well, I mean, Home is obviously on PS4 and Vita as well. It's like Bundle is a cross-buy title, and the idea of that was pretty interesting because it just seemed to work in both cases. And I'm like everyone else, like I love playing games on the Vita, and there's certain games that just feel really great on it. So a lot of it was just saying like, well, I did Home on both. Like, I'm pretty sure this will be fine. Now, of course, I'm thinking, oh, man, like, I hope I can crunch this memory down enough that I don't have, like, this really long load time or some weirdness going on. But it seemed like a really good idea at the time. But a lot of it was just that because I'm making a game that is not super low res, but it's, this one is 2D as well, pixel art. There's just something about that screen on a Vita, regardless of which version you have, where just, like, even on that smaller screen, it just looks so nice. And I'm just kind of the kind of person who says, like, well, I would want a version of this. So I guess we're going to do that.
Yeah.
And hopefully that's not a terrible idea. And I guess we'll find that out soon enough.
So very important question here too. Are you an OLED Vita guy or the slim version?
We have both.
Okay.
But the bulk of the stuff that I sort of fell in love with on the Vita, which is, like Persona 4 Golden and things like that, I played on the original Vita. But I kind of really love the slim Vita because I just love the hardware design of it. Like, like I'm like everyone else, where I wish I could just slap that OLED screen inside that slim Vita. But there's something about the form factor of the slim that I really, really like. So I tend to default to that.
I am always, I have the OLED one, and I'm always thinking, I'm like, I know this screen's real nice, but man, that slim is just so pretty. And that blue one they have at GameStop is just perfect. I've been close to trading it in to get it, but I'm like, am I going to miss that OLED screen?
It's interesting. Like certain things, I mean, you put them side by side, you absolutely do notice. But I don't know. It's like Sony just has this history of just like absolutely insane engineering with products. Like you see the difference between some of their consoles and other stuff where they're like, yeah, we don't have a power brick because we just figured out how to not have one.
Yeah.
Like, wait, but I thought everything had like this 20-pound thing that sucks up a ton of wattage. Like, now we just figured out you don't need it. I'm like, how? But they're kind of like, that's sort of what they've always been known for through their history. So the Vita Slim, every time I use it, I think like, look at this thing, like the amount of power this thing has and just how tiny it is. And it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Like if you brought this to, again, I absolutely love the original Game Boy, of course, like so many other people. But if you had brought this to 1989 version of me and said, this is what a handheld console could do, you just unbelievable. So there's something about it where I just sort of like it because it's so technically impressive that I have a hard time not favoring the new one.
Now, truthfully, you made me very, very happy just moments ago because I am just coming off the high of Persona 4.
Right.
So it took me...
That's a good place to be.
Yeah, it took me a year to get through it because I think I played about 40 hours and then I dropped it right around, the holiday blitz of new games.
Right.
And I dropped it for a couple months and I picked it back up and powered through the rest with 70 hours.
Wow.
And man, just so awesome. I'm playing Dancing All Night right now.
That's awesome.
And it's just great. And so where my segue is here is that I was reading that Polygon article and it seems like there could be some Persona inspirations in this new game.
Yeah. So what kind of happened was I was thinking about next games to make after Home, and I just, again, like had just been riding that Persona 4 Golden High, which is just sort of a magical place to be.
It's so good. So good. I think about it every day, even though it's been probably about 3 weeks since I beat the game.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I get it. It's the best. And I think I thought about that, like what are these amazing feelings I'm feeling? What are these things I'm thinking? And what does this sort of mean? And part of that was thinking about romance games or games that use romance as an element and thinking about new ways to do that. Kind of like, with Home, it was really designed project to say, again, how can you make a horror game with these certain elements and certain constrictions? And with romance-related stuff, or at least kind of character-driven stuff, I thought, what can you do that's not, a sort of Japanese-style dating sim? Because they're very, Persona 4 Golden, I think, is still one of the weird outliers, even though it is sort of very cemented in that genre and its traditions. But they're all so similar in including the character types and just sort of the tropes of place and time and setting and whatnot. And it's just one of those genres that feels like it has so much room to move, but nobody ever does. So, I mean, I call Alone with You like a sci-fi romance adventure, but it's not a dating sim in the traditional style. Like romance is an element, and it's kind of a bit of a hook to get some other, like it's the main core of the story and the themes of the game and everything, as you'll see when you play it, is all related to that idea. But it's not, it's not like pumping numbers into a ranking system to sort of like win bonus points with GA or something like that. It's really meant to be something where, like you say, hopefully you're just thinking about things when you're not playing it, and that kind of fills in a lot of that for you. Because the thing that I learned a long time ago is that players, as you sort of just proved, spend way more time thinking about games between sessions than we often give them credit for. And they do a lot of the work in games on their own. Because if you give people just enough and get them engaged in a certain way, just like with television, movies, or books or anything, people will just run rampant with that. They'll be coming up with ideas, they'll be thinking about things, they'll be talking about it with other people, and they'll just really be focusing a huge part of their mind bandwidth on the product that you made. And what's so neat about that is that we dump tons of things in the games, menus, items, GUI, all that kind of stuff. And so much of it is unnecessary, because if you just give people room to breathe, they will fill in all these blanks themselves. They will put all these items together. They will start filling in these adventures, these moments, and these connections, and they will start paying attention more when you're not distracting them with, like, again, menus and pop-ups and stuff like that. So the idea with this is really just, rather than say, okay, it's a dating game and now a bunch of stuff happens and watch these meters and numbers and really hope that you get the person you want, none of that was factored in. The idea was everything is based around this concept of the relationship, from every single story that's in the game, to the subplots, to all the little character moments that you discover, to the environmental details that you discover, to the actual people that you were having a quote-unquote romance with. It's all focused on these themes that all sort of cycle back around to these very specific concepts that you'll kind of sort of figure out as you go through it. So, but all of that came from the idea of, like you say, hey, I've just put Persona down and all I can do is think about this. All I'm doing is wondering when I'm going to get to see this person I apparently care about next, this digital person I'm dating. And I may have mentioned this in PSX, I can't remember, but the joke that I always say is that one time when I was playing the game, it was sort of like a week of real-time play, sort of like go through some dungeons, do some other things. And there was one day during the week when I was finally getting one of the great date scenes with the, whichever character you were sort of into at the time. And I was on the couch, I was playing, I was really into it. And then my wife comes into the room and was going to ask me a question. And I just sort of paused the Vita and just looked at her and said, "No, like you can't do this now. It's date time with Yukiko. I've been waiting all week for this."
Yukiko. I was going to ask you who your lady of choice was in Persona. I'm curious.
It was Yukiko. I've had lots of Yukiko versus Chie debates with people over the last few years.
Interesting, because I was a Rise fan. So,
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. It is. Someone needs to do a study on what it means about a person based on what Persona character they choose to romance.
Well, that's like if you ever played Silent Hill Shattered Memories. That's basically what that game is.
Interesting. I've never heard that about that game before.
Oh yeah, you should. That's a mind job. You should totally play that.
That one's on Wii, right?
That's right.
Okay, interesting. So speaking of mind games, in this Polygon article, you also mentioned that you're putting some mind games in this game as well.
Right.
So obviously, without spoiling it, because that's the whole point. I'm curious about what some of your thoughts are behind that.
Sure. Well, the whole point is, once again, there's a theme behind the entire game. Everything explores that theme, and some things are not going to sort of play through the way you might expect. Part of that, and sometimes this is a risk, but it's kind of just the thing I feel compelled to do, where some people might come into the game and be like, "Oh, I thought this is like a straight up Japanese dating sim." It's not. Like, it's not going to play quite that way. But there are elements of these things that sort of make you, I hope, make you think about some of these elements, like elements of other games, some of these systems, but also just make you think about some of these basic concepts, like in real life and whatnot. So I try to always, like in writing this stuff, I try to always say, if there's a point where you pause the game or you sort of finish the mission and you walk away and you don't come back to it for a little while, what's the thing that you'll take away with? Kind of like when you watch like an amazing episode of a television show where you just walk away and you say, like, I haven't stopped thinking about this concept, or a movie that really just gives you that one thing. Sometimes it's not even like the big thing. It's just the concept of, I never realized that people in this country did X and how that affects all this other stuff. Like, I had no idea. And suddenly now I'm just reconsidering all these things or these assumptions that I made at the beginning of this film. So a lot of that is just to get you to think about the idea of relationships in general. Everything is about that. What kinds of relationships are there? How do people deal with them? What happens when things go bad? And again, obviously, like you say, I shouldn't spoil anything, but this isn't a game that's going to tell you a bunch of things so specifically. It's hopefully going to get you to realize things maybe about yourself more.
Interesting.
And kind of like with Home, it's not like I hit you over the head like, well, obviously you're a sociopath because this happened, which is, I think sort of cheap and not necessarily the best way to go. But to get you a discussion point where once certain things play out and you sort of realize things, or certain decisions you make, you realize, and especially like we were doing just now with Persona, you talk to somebody else, you say, wait a minute, that's interesting. I didn't know you could do that with so-and-so, or that you could ask them this question, or that there's this thing about them. I never even thought about that because I was so worried about this other issue or about this other character. And I feel like it's really easy. It's easy, and it's also attractive in games to sort of make things very specific bullet points that can be, like checked off a programming list to say, like, this is a quest line that you will fulfill that says, boom, you've got S rank and, Yukiko or whatever. And now that you can talk about that with everyone. But the stuff that I always find more interesting is sort of the gray areas in between, where you say, so you went through this area and you chose to spend this time with this person, and then this thing happened, and they reacted a certain way. But did you notice that, like, when you did this with somebody else, they reacted differently? Like, what does that say about you? There's sort of other little things. And it's always a risk because sometimes you can just kind of, like, people can kind of miss that. And you think, oh, maybe you're just a crappy game designer, not intelligent at all. But hopefully, and again, I guess we'll find out, but hopefully that's not the case, because I really want everyone to finish the game and then go, oh man, and suddenly just think about themselves in certain regards, as opposed to like going on GameFAQs and just checking like, oh, how many specific checkboxes did I check this playthrough?
Yeah, and
I don't know if that's clear, but
no, it sounds awesome. I'm curious. So from kind of the impression I'm getting, like we had said in Persona, it's like you can say this, and then it's like, oh, that's probably what I shouldn't have said, or it was like the good or the bad thing. From what it sounds like, you're kind of trying to create this angle like, well, it's not going to necessarily tell you whether that was the good or bad thing, but that's just the natural flow of the relationship, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I will never give you like the bonus cue to say like, oh, you got +2 points with GA. It's more about, I mean, I said this to a bunch of people at PSX, like the game is kind of like a series of weird OkCupid dates. And one of the main themes of the game is obviously relationships, but the other one is that kind of just doing the best with the time you have. Because the setup, as I've told people for the last little while, is that you only have so much time till you know that this planet you're on is going to explode. And the whole point is you're trying to get off. So these things happen. This isn't a game like in Persona where you get like a whole summer or a year or whatever, and it's building up this like long, slow burning, intense teenage romance, that kind of thing. It's more about what happens when you're in this situation that's never ideal, it's weird, and then you talk to these people, and the situation in which you talk to them is also never ideal and weird. And then you just have these conversations. Like, can people feel stuff in those moments? Can you go through a moment with only so much exposure to a person or so much time and get something out of that? Like, what does that do to you as a player? Do you get any affection for that person? Do you sort of think about them differently? Do you make choices based on things you're thinking about when you're not playing? That kind of stuff. So, and again, it's kind of a minimalist concept where the game could be 4 times longer and bigger and have like a million dates and all this kind of events. But I feel like to get to the point of having you question those things or notice that you're doing something or thinking about something a certain way, you only need to do so much. And that's kind of the litmus test for this. It'll be if people come back with those responses and they say, every time I wasn't talking to so-and-so, all I was doing was thinking about them. Which is crazy, and even though maybe you only get to talk to them so many times. But, the other concept that I keep mentioning at PSX is like the idea of like the summer romance where, hey, maybe you're on summer vacation and you're like 14 and you meet this girl and you have 2 weeks together and suddenly she's the most interesting human being you've ever met in the entire world. But you're going to leave at the end of it. What's that like? And how the emotional highs and lows you can sort of hit in that entirely compressed period is pretty interesting. And that's kind of what this is sort of about.
Tell me if I'm wrong here, but is this also kind of a Mass Effect type vibe as far as the romance in a very strange situation that's not normal?
Yeah. So it's super funny you say that because I just recently played Mass Effect 1 again because I love Mass Effect, obviously.
So good.
And I'm one of those people who loves Mass Effect 1 because of its vibe, especially its music, the way it looks. And even how clunky it is, that's okay. But it just feels like this perfect sci-fi thing that was never quite reached again. But when playing it, I was sort of studying some things that I hadn't noticed the first time around. And when you're romancing someone, like if you're going after Liara, for example, you only talk to them 3 times.
Yeah.
You literally have 3 conversations. And then it's like maybe you're going to sleep with them.
And now
then
it's sexy time.
That's right. But the whole point is not the fact that you only have 3 conversations. It's the fact that you go out on a mission and you might bring them with you because you're like, well, I like this person apparently, so I want to bring them with me because maybe they'll say something interesting, or I just want them around. Or maybe you don't bring them with you because a quest kind of recommends somebody else. And you're thinking about the whole time. So much of what happens in Mass Effect in terms of people getting engaged with a character is very little to do with like a systemic, touch point. It's to set up those emotional cues and those moments and then let players really just absorb everything in between. And when I played it through a second time, I realized, hold on, 3 conversations and then you get sexy time? Like, that actually makes a lot of sense. But I didn't notice that the first time around because I was just so busy thinking about, whichever character it was. And in all 3 games, it was kind of a similar situation.
Yeah, and I'm curious, like, so are there non-romantic relationships as well in this game?
Well, that depends on how you do it, I guess. I mean, so the way it works is that there are 4 major areas, and you visit each of those areas 3 times, or rather you visit, 3 levels with that area. So there's basically 12 main missions. So it takes place over 3 acts. And every time you finish a mission, you get to talk to one of the 4 people that are, that are sort of advertised in the different trailers and stuff. So you go do a mission in one area, you'll get to talk to the person who's associated with that area and talk about some of the stuff you saw there. So it kind of works that way. You go do the next mission the next day, then you're going to go talk to the person that way. But there are other things that happen in between that give you the opportunity to connect with certain people, so that even though you're doing a mission that's kind of inherently related to somebody else, you can still be interacting with this other person in sort of a tangential way. And again, that's the whole idea of getting you to allow yourself to be thinking about someone and maybe act on it in a certain way, because the player will want to inherently, by virtue of just saying somebody's interesting. So whether or not it's kind of romantic is absolutely up to the player. Similar to how in Home, whether or not a certain story plays out, or whether a certain thread is kind of like the quote unquote way things happened, is entirely up to you. I'm taking the same tack with Alone with You in that a lot of this is psychological. You don't need to have a meter for you to decide whether you're interested in somebody. If you're interested in somebody, you will make certain choices, you will say things, you will spend time with them whenever you get the opportunity to. And you actually don't need to codify that in, like a menu necessarily. I don't think you do anyway. And that's kind of the point, is just to see if I'm right.
Man, it really sounds awesome. I'm almost thinking right now, I'm like, man, maybe I should have played that demo at PSX.
That's right. You said you didn't want to spoil it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, so let's plug it up here a little bit. When can we expect this game coming out?
So it is coming out this year. I said at PSX spring. We're gonna look at that because there's a lot of games coming out in spring. But basically, within the next few months for sure. Like I have a sort of cutoff date for a bunch of things. So you'll play it like within the first half of this year, and that'll be on PS4 and Vita. So man, it's actually terrifying to say that because it's not done yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, now we had talked about what your team was like on Home. Obviously, you, pretty much.
Right.
You had some other outside help, but now, what does your team look like on Alone with You? Is it similar to the one in Home, or I could have swore you said you had a couple more people in with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually very lucky to have found some people to work with this time around, which has just been kind of amazing. So I'm doing the main writing, the design, the programming, all that kind of stuff. And I've done a certain part of the artwork as well, character art and setting up a bunch of stuff and all the sort of concepts and whatnot. But we actually have team members now. So we have Gavin, who is the background artist, and he's done all the environment art in the game, essentially. And he's doing some more as well now. So all the backgrounds that you will see in screenshots and like just amazingly intricate, nerdy computer terminals and things like that. Like he's done all that kind of stuff. So he was brought on last year and has been on the project for almost 9 months now. It's been pretty amazing. And then Ivor, who there was exactly 21 seconds of music in Home. Ivor did those 21 seconds. Now he's doing all the music and sound design and sound effects for Alone with You, which is a considerably larger amount than that. I have an iTunes playlist with, man, how much music is in here? Like 48 minutes of music, and that's not even all the music in. So he's been making like a ton of tracks and a bunch of great stuff. So he's been doing all that, which has been fantastic, and that's been super cool. As well as my wife is kind of like CFO and doing all that kind of stuff. And there have been other people locally who've been helping me, including my friend Mike, who's been doing consultation on story and helping me sort of like focus on project management stuff and kind of just like checking in and saying like, okay, you said you're doing this. This doesn't make any sense. Let's review this. Let's cut to the chase. Let's rewrite this if we have to, and kind of checksumming me on all sort of my grand ideas. So all in all, it's actually like, it's weird to have a team. So, and it's been fantastic. It's just bizarre to sort of think that other people want to partake in this insane journey with you.
Awesome, dude. Yeah, it all sounds really, really exciting. And it's cool to see how you've grown from this small little game Home to obviously your ambition has grown so much. And it's really, really neat.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
So anyone listening to this podcast, how can they either follow you or check out all the different things you got going on?
So number one thing would be, if you're on Twitter, just follow me at Benjamin Rivers. If you Google me, I have destroyed all the other Benjamin Rivers in the world, so you'll only find me. So that's the easiest way. Obviously, AloneWithYouGame.com is the official website, and there's also Alone with You Game, which is on Facebook. But like Twitter, I'm on every day checking stuff out. It's a great way to get a hold of me, and I love when people sort of poke at me with questions and things like that. So
awesome. Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on, especially because this is our first episode. We really appreciate it. It was really special for us. I don't know if I mentioned this in email at all, but one of the reason we were inspired to do this podcast was from interactions that we had at PSX. And you were one of the big ones. We're like, dude, this guy's really awesome. And he obviously has a great story behind the things he's working on. So we really, really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for saying so. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, I guess that's it. So thanks again. And we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.
So once again, we want to thank Ben so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it, especially with it being our maiden voyage.
Yeah, that's
here on
right.
DevTales.
And man, was it ever.
Yeah, for sure. So if you liked this podcast, if you liked this interview, we're going to be doing more. We've already sent out more email requests. Hopefully, we're going to have some real soon. So hit that subscribe button on iTunes. Or if you're listening on YouTube, hit the subscribe on the Handsome Phantom YouTube channel. We really appreciate it. Leave a comment, like it. Go to handsomephantom.com for all of our great content. I don't know if it's great. I hope you think it's great.
I hope you think it's great. If you're ever in doubt of where to find anything us, whether it be Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, etc., go to handsomephantom.com and easily you will find everything you need.
Another really important thing is Brandon and I do another podcast. If this is your first time hearing us, it's called Adventure Mode, and it's more of our topical weekly game show where we bullcrap. We talk about different games. We talk about Taco Bell and terrible service at Dunkin' Donuts. So
yeah,
it runs the full gamut of important things.
That's right. We just like to have a good time, and that's where you'll get your less DevTales.
Yeah,
and
more Taco Bell talk. So
precisely.
Make sure you check out Adventure Mode. It's also available on iTunes. So until next time, I'm Dustin.
I'm Brandon.
And we'll see you guys later. Thanks for listening to this podcast.
Bye, guys.